So again, thanks for coming. What I'm going to do is I'll just say like some statements that I wrote down so that I can talk about those first, and then I'll start showing my work and a progression of the work, and then I also brought some originals with me. So that's what I do. So basically, I figured I'd start out by saying that I believe in mythology, and I'm drawn to narratives. So a lot of my work is about storytelling and narratives. And it actually breaks into two things, where one is about narratives and another one it's about landscapes. Welcome, thank you for coming. Landscapes and compositions. So you'll see that I've actually traveled around quite a bit, and I've done work in different landscapes around the world. And usually those pieces are of bright colors. And then I also have the storytelling pieces, which for the most part, they're about Jewish subject matter. I believe that through art I can have a voice and open the door to reach people. I really truly believe that about my work. I believe in cultural stories, and I believe that looking at other people's cultures, I realize that Judaism has a lot of graphic images, a lot that can be told through artwork. Actually, this Haggadah happened, I think I got the commission in the early 70s from a cousin of mine. I had done a Holocaust Haggadah commemorating the Holocaust. A cousin of mine, both cousins were survivors, and asked me to do a Haggadah about the Holocaust. So we'll look at that later. I worked a lot in advertising, and a lot of the narratives that I work at, I used to be a storyboard artist for about 10, 15, 20 years, doing advertising work for TV commercials and movies and things like that. So I'm used to drawing, I'll show you some of the drawings. I'm used to drawing figures and thinking in terms of how would a camera see something. When I came in now into doing narrative biblical stories, I also kind of approached it as a filmmaker, as somebody who would shoot a story and tell the story in the strongest possible way. I'll show you the advertising work, and then I'll show you the other ones. I should also say that throughout my schooling, I don't think they were giving tests for dyslexia or any problems in reading, but I have amazing problems in reading. It's crazy that I'm actually making books now, and have been making books for about 20 years now, but it might have something to do that I've always had trouble understanding and reading basic text. So what I do is I make my own stories. I mean, I work with stories, and then I make my own stories. So usually with the biblical work, this goes back to talking about the biblical stuff, I work with a study partner, Chavruta kind of situation, and the person who I've been working with the most, about 8 years now, is the head of the rare books room at Jewish Theological Seminary, and his name is David Kramer, and we've been study partners. We meet like every couple of weeks. We've been doing it for about 8 years now, and through that meeting, I've done a lot of artwork, a lot of books, and the relationship is great because he speaks Hebrew and reads Arabic, and he's an incredible wealth of information. So he'll say to me after we finish a book, "What would you like to work on now?" So it's just the entire catalog is open. He also has the library at JTS, which is a beautiful library, and we also go into the stacks and go through books that have been done before, Sephardic manuscripts, all sorts of things we're always looking at. So I want to give a shout out, I want to give a lot of honor to the people who I've studied with. I've also had a calligrapher who worked on this with me, which was a 4-year project to do the Holocaust Haggadah, which his name is Yonah Weinrib. And he has done a lot of books himself, and he's an incredible calligrapher and a rabbi, and I've worked with him on this book of Yonah that I've done, and all sorts of pieces. I have my own mythology, which I sort of think I should talk about here a little bit. David Wander, I was named after, is my grandfather, and he was born in Krakow. And he was a diamond cutter, which at the time was, probably still is, a profession that a lot of Jewish people were in. He didn't have such an easy time making money, and when his son, Gustav Wander, my dad, wanted to be an artist, he thought that wasn't a profession for a Jewish boy. So he was sort of, hey, thanks for coming. He was he was told that being an artist was not something he could do, and he always sort of felt bad about that. So when he had a son, that would be me, there was almost no question I was going to be an artist. So if I could draw, he was going to be. So actually a little bit of continuing that is I also try to do when I'm teaching here, teach that there is a place for being Jewish and being an artist. So it's very important to me to show that you can be creative and keep... thanks for coming. So that's a little mythology that I live with. And I think a lot about that idea of Abraham, who had dug wells, and then the wells were covered up, and his son spent a lot of his time redigging the wells. And basically that idea of recovering things that your father had done. My dad was a painter, and I lost him this year. Actually, I lost my mom and my dad this year. So, and my dad was a painter, because actually when we graduated from high school, he decided, my brother and I, he had done what he had to do. His father had just passed away, and he was like, you know what? Whatever. So for 40 years, he worked as a painter, and my mom worked as a potter, and together they lived a life in the arts. Some people have mentioned that Four Sons drawing. That one from the Haggadah got a lot of press. It was printed in a lot of books. It was in a lot of anthologies. That was a commission that I had gotten, and I'll talk more about that. My mom used to always say, learn something, do something, teach something, and it's yours. So because I had so much of a problem in academics, I never thought I could be a teacher, really, because that would be going into an academic world that was always so difficult to me. So I got the learning part down, I got the doing part down, but the teaching part wasn't so easy for me, and I didn't believe I could, except when I met David Friedman at a Shabbos lunch, who said he's the head of the art department at SAR. At which point I said, I really want to work at SAR. And he took a real chance team teaching with me so that I can understand the teaching process. And then I've been here 8 years, but really thanks to David's belief that I could do it, and that actually did happen at the Roofers Shabbat lunch. I'll always remember that, and thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, I didn't take such a chance.
I'll take that.
Thank you.
Right. All right. Right. I also, according to my story, I'd also like to dedicate this talk to my folks, and also to a fellow named Bill Riley, who was the art teacher at Teaneck High School, where I went to high school. And I believe that, I had told you about my problems in academia. I believe that with the guidance counselors who looked at my tests said that they thought an auto mechanic would be a good job for me to do, honestly, and that college might not be the way to really go. An auto mechanic would be good. And Bill Riley said, really? He said, okay, so we're going to apply to RISD, Pratt, and Yale. And I couldn't go to Yale, even though I was at the interview, and it was just too crazy. But I did get into RISD, and I did get into Pratt, and I did get into all the art schools. And then I've just I've done artwork my whole life. Being in advertising, I've always painted and shown. I've been showing since, I guess, well, I'd like to say 20, but it's more like 15. I've been in shows. I think probably the most prestigious was having a one-man show at Yad Vashem, but it was also at the Museum of Modern Art. So I've shown, and then every other small venue across the country that I can get into. So I'll show wherever. Right now I have a Holocaust Haggadah show in Portland, Oregon, and one in New Rochelle. And then there's a show of my landscapes up in Lenox, Massachusetts, and I have another show at Hebrew Union College, a piece in there. So I'm always trying to show, I feel it's part of the process, but maybe I can show you now a little bit of what my work looks like and how it got to where it is. Let's see. We're going to start with, I did a whole bunch of folders. Oh yeah, I did a whole bunch of folders. My dad was let's see how we can do it. Does it work? Yeah. My dad was a watercolor painter, and so of course I had to try my hand in watercolor. Just hit the green one, and that'll do what? That'll be full, right? Okay, great, thanks. I would do like, I would look around for scenes that looked like set-up sculptures. This is what I was doing in college. So in other words, I'd look for interesting things, take a photograph of them, and then I was a photorealist, so I would paint as realistically in watercolor as possible to make it look as photoreal as possible. So I would look for scenes that were kind of unusual, and then these were large paintings about this size, but because they were done in layers of very light washes, one on top of the other until it got to be the blacks, but the blacks had all these colors in them, they took months and months and months to do a piece. And they were also done projected, and so there was no real drawing involved for these, but I had done a series, let's see how I can close this down. I'd done a series of these pieces, and graduated Pratt with a show of this kind of work. At least I did a whole lot of construction in the streets. I always thought that was kind of interesting and sculptural looking, so I would photograph and go around, and then I would paint pieces of things that I had seen. Again, these were like really, they took a really long time to do. Yeah, that's better. Again, all of these washes, like to get a tone like this in watercolor, you know, you're doing very light washes, one on top of the other with really, thanks for coming. So this is, now how do I get, oh, there we go. All right, this one also, I lived on the Lower East Side for a very long time. This was a piece done right by the Williamsburg Bridge. The Williamsburg, I got into reflections also with this photoreal stuff. There's a reflection of me taking the picture. There's a reflection of the Williamsburg Bridge. And these were stores that used to sell clothing for Hispanic kids. Yeah. Again, with this kind of thing, my dad was a watercolorist, and he never really went to art school because of the original problem. So he believed that the American Watercolor Society was like the most wonderful thing in the world. So of course I tried to get into the American Watercolor Society. I mean, you know, it's what you do. It's tough to have a parent who's an artist when, you know, it's just in case anybody runs into that. But I think the way the AWS goes is that if you get 3 paintings in 5 years, you become a member. And so I got 2 paintings in 2 years, and then I put in a 3rd, and they rejected it, and I was like, forget this. So I didn't. I mean, that was fun, but that was what I was doing in watercolor. At the same time I was doing watercolor, I was fascinated with printmaking. And also my dad, I'm going to give him, you know, he was a photo engraver, and he used to always bring back color separations when I was a kid, and they'd be on acetates, and you could see how the cyan and the magenta, the yellow and the black would form a picture. And I grew up with that, and so I became a printmaking major. I was a printmaking major at Pratt, and at RISD I studied it. And then I left school and I went to Europe, and I was a printmaker. I love lithography, so I was a printmaker in Copenhagen, and I was a printmaker in Amsterdam, and then I had a print shop of my own, and I worked at Circle Fine Art in Eleanor Ettinger's, and I worked in a lot of print shops throughout the city, because at that time printmaking was a new sort of big deal. So I printed for hundreds of artists. The idea behind that is you became a technician, and then you helped an artist make a print, either if they didn't know how to do it or if they were dead. You could make a print for them too. So I actually worked a lot for this guy. That's Pablo Picasso, and I worked for Marina Picasso, making lithographs of her collection of her dad's work. And so this was when I say that I was a printmaker, I mean you redraw the whole thing, and you break it down into color plates. So there may have been like 14 different color plates on that. The drawing had to be done so many times, but that's something that I just love doing. And here's another example of one of hers that was from Marina Picasso's collection. I had a person who taught me about this chromist technique. His name was Marcel Salinas, and he was Picasso's actual chromist, one of Picasso's actual chromists, and he taught me the skills, and then I actually did 50 or so prints for Marina's collection. So that was what I was doing while I was doing the watercolors, I also did this for, let's see, this is Chagall. I did this for the Hermitage Museum in Russia, because that was the collection of that piece. Again, you know, to get these greens, you had to draw maybe like 3 or 4 different types of greens and print them one on top of the other, and figure out how it works and do it all. You know, so I was very interested in that technical aspect of this thing. I had done this for the Hermitage, and then Russia fell. So the Soviet Union fell, and they didn't print the thing in the end. So I have a few of the proofs, but it never got printed, never got published. And then here's a more contemporary person. It's funny, you know, here's a guy named Sandro Chia, who was very big in like the 80s, I think 90s, right? I did this print for him. I was actually a printmaker that did a lot of work. I was one of his printmakers. So they used to write, you know, they write to David, like at the bottom of my side. So I got all the prints that I worked on. I have like dedicated prints. That's what they used to do. To a printmaker, they give him prints. You know about that, right? Jeffrey Packard here is a printmaker and an artist also. You know, so we've worked together. And very good. Just want to say. I'm just saying. Okay, so this was work that I had done for a good 9 years. And there used to be a time when, you know, if you were doing this kind of thing, it was a very romantic kind of situation. Oh, maybe I'll show this one too. I'll move.
Show a few things.
What's that?
Show a few things.
I think I will.
That makes it more interesting.
Okay, then I'll do that. Thanks. And this drawing I did for Picasso, for Marina Picasso, but I mean, it was done maybe with 3 different or 4 different grays, and it was I redrew it like Picasso would have drawn. It's, you know, and then there's a Picasso museum in the Marais in France, you know, right? And I walked into the Marais, and then all of a sudden there was that piece. So it was, you have such an amazing, you know, feeling that you sort of did it a little, and then there was, you know, or it might have been a piece where she wasn't holding a book. You know, it was a little bit, maybe it was this or it was a little different. So, you know, again, it was. There was that. So I did a lot of printmaking. Oh, I wanted to say, yeah, I was way into this whole thing. I used to have a link up to here and chemicals everywhere, and I developed this kind of bronchitis cough that I couldn't really speak without coughing. So I went to an OSHA doctor, and they said, okay, that was the end of your printmaking experience. So I sold the presses, and I got rid of, you know, slowly, but and then had to do much less. But it was like cigarette out of the mouth and printmaking and ink up to, you know, it was like a whole thing. It was a thing. Okay, I don't know, can't explain why. Okay, so at the same time, after I had left printmaking, because I had to, I got into advertising work, because I used to draw for Picasso, so I could draw for pretty much advertising agencies. So what I did was I did a lot of, or something. That doesn't really work. Right. Thank you. Thank you. I used to work then in Magic Marker a lot, and let's see if this shows up. This is sort of an example of the kind of work that I was doing. Would be a comp work, because at the time Photoshop hadn't been developed, so it was like putting things together, but by being able to draw them together. So I would do a lot of drawing for that. And here's another example. I think, let's see, I did this for Maccabi Beer. There was at the time, it's a long time ago. But I think somebody said, well, you know, we're going to start off in Netanya, and Netanya has all these bathing beauties, and then there's Maccabi Beer, and then on the streets you'll see a Maccabi truck. And in my mind I thought, and there are camels, you know, because they'd never been to Israel at the time. So put a little camel there, and then, you know, I mean, you know, but, you know, when it goes down the line, it goes down, and, you know, they take the camel out. But then, you know, this guy, you know, he's showing, you know, and everybody's, oh, Israel is so modern and all that, and then it's Maccabi Beer. So this was, I was doing this for many years in advertising. Here's another example. I did, those are called Storyboards, and they pretty much show a client how a product would be shot. This was for Gillette, and there was like, it starts at that corner, and there's a little something growing, and it gets bigger, and it looks like a forest, but oh my God, it's a hair. And then, and then there's a light coming through the side, and it's the razor, and it cuts off these little hairs, and then it's so gleaming and wonderful. And then you see the shot there, and then up there, you get a close-up of the face with the stubble, and then you see such a handsome guy, and then the razor itself is kind of gleaming because it's actually using diamond technology. Just say it. So whatever. So these are the diamond technology and all the so, and there's him through the gate of the shaper, and then it comes out and you can see the diamond with the thing. This is the kind of thing that I was drawing, and I was doing a lot of this in advertising. Let's see. Also, I worked for, a lot of times Rolling Stone would, there was an Absolute, used to be a lot of Absolute ads. I would draw a lot of those, but they got so popular that people would send comps to Absolute to try to get Absolute to advertise in their paper. So I worked for Rolling Stone magazine for, actually while I was in another agency, and I would do a lot of drawing from this. So they used to do Absolute, stand-up Absolute, Keith Haring Absolute. That was their thing, so I did a lot of work for them. Another thing I used to do for, finish this just in a second. I used to do, this, yeah. We have some library posters in the library. I used to do the library posters for the, they used to do these things, I'll make it a little bigger. I was trying to get kids to read. So it would be whenever a movie would come out, they would do like Raiders of the Lost Ark would be, and he's carrying a book under his arms. Or Yoda is so smart because he's sitting on a bunch of books. So I would do all this stuff. You'll see, I think in the library now there's Ethan Hawke and somebody else who's doing that. But anyway, we did this. So I did a lot of work in advertising. Again, while I was working in advertising, there's a lot of there, but that's just I was painting all the time. And then around, even like while this was going on, while I was a printmaker, my cousin Siegfried Wallach went through he lived in Lvov. And in Lvov, when the Nazis came, the people went into Russia. And when they went into Russia, the Jewish people, when they went into Russia, the Russians put them into the gulags, camps. So a lot of people from Lvov did get out of Poland, but did end up in Russian concentration camps. Helen Wander, my cousin, who he had married, she lived through Krakow through the war as she got fake papers. So she lived with fake papers. Most of the Wanderers were killed. So like I had gone to see all the streets where the Wanderers were from, but Helen and Rella, her sister, were blonde, and they got fake papers, and nobody else in the family could get them. We have Gingy kind of side of the family that has so. Ziggy had said to me Siegfried Wallach, he said he thought the idea of going from Egypt to Israel was like people like him going from Europe to Israel. So there was the same kind of connection, going from tight spaces to freedom was similar to that. So he said, could you please do a Haggadah that commemorates the Holocaust? Thanks for coming. So I made this, the one thing he said was, no matter what, don't change the text. I had contacted a bunch of writers and a bunch of artists, and I was going to work together on this big conglomerate, and he said, no, you're doing the art, and nobody's changing the text. So he said, because I want this book to be able to be used. So I did this, let's see. I worked with Yona Weinberg, I had talked to him before, and did the calligraphy, and this book this one got a lot of press. I didn't want to use pictures of people from the camps, although I looked through thousands and thousands before I started this project. Really, like I went to Evo, I went wherever I could to find pictures. And then in the end I decided that since people go to more Seders than, like people who never step into a synagogue will make sure they're at a Seder. So I mean, like the Seder is such an important thing that I wanted it not to be filled with emaciated people. I wanted it to be filled with symbols of this so that it could translate, I thought, in an easier way. That's maybe not said the right way, but so I showed earlier the one of the Seder plate, which is this one, and this is I made a whole sort of, I don't know, symbols where I used the concentration camp suits were going to be the matzah, and the moror was going to be the yellow star, and the bands here were going to be like the fill-in bands, but you were tied to this story, and each one. There was blood that represented wine, and there was all sorts of things. The entire book had no people. So when I got to the Four Sons, because I hated reading, and I would always actually try to figure out what section of mine was when I was sitting down there, what part I'd be reading. I made the one who doesn't know how to ask, and the simple son being the one who looks at a book and there's nothing in it, because that would sort of be the way I kind of looked at books. So that's the way I did it. Strange thing about that piece, which is kind of odd, is that it's been in a lot of seders where people discuss who's the wise son, who's the wicked, and who's the simple one. And just recently, I've been doing a little bit of teaching at night at Chovevei Torah, and there's a rabbi student there who goes to Rikers Island, and he used this piece to talk to the prisoners at Rikers Island about the Seder. And he asked them, who's the wise son and who's the wicked? And it frequently, there was a bunch of women's seders downtown, and that was used as a discussion. It's been used quite a bit. The guy, Noam Zion at Hartman Institute, was the one who put this into his A Different Night Seder book, so that's where it got into it. Anyway, so this is I obviously made it the wise son, the wicked son, the book burner being the Nazi. The simple son would be me who could read, and the one who didn't know how to ask wouldn't even open up the book. So that was an obvious one for me, but it's been talked about in so many ways. There was a student here named Rufi Pignon, who I really remember him. I really like that
He's
guy.
engaged and getting married.
Mazel tov, really? Is he still in the hotel business then?
I don't exactly know. He's a good friend of one of my sons.
Wonderful. Yeah, he's a good guy. He was the one, he looked at this piece and he said, the wicked son represents the book burners in the Holocaust. It seems that the entire picture is illuminated by the wicked son. And it was, to me, when he said that, sometimes you get somebody looking at your work and they say something and it just opens up the entire thing. And he actually did that with that statement. So these are different pieces that were in that book. This one represents, I always thought, we easily opened the door for Elijah and we let Elijah in. But in fact, if people were hiding, and maybe they'd be in Krakow, and you couldn't open the door. And if you did open the door, or maybe the door got kicked in, and everybody was taken out, and the books were aflame, and everything was in the air, and this is really what happened when you open the door for Elijah. But I made Elijah's chair being stable, and Elijah's cup being in the air, because the belief that the Messiah is going to come is like a magical belief, and that's what we live by. So this is what I did. It turns out that this actually, there was a German professor at Humboldt University who got really interested in this Haggadah and thought it should be printed in German. So I worked on the phone with him for about, the internet. So we worked for about a year translating it into German and explaining it. And the internet, right, it was a new thing. And so they printed it in German in Humboldt University, and there was a show in Berlin, and I went there to speak in Berlin, and it's in German, and it has a back cover, a back little booklet, so that they teach the Russians who are coming in, because they're not so religious, how to use the book, and it's printed in German. So anyway, the reason I said that was whatever. Let's see. Here's another one that I like. It's Ani Ma'amin. And the idea behind that was the principles of faith form the hand of God. In other words, if you believe, it sort of anthropomorphizes God. It sort of makes God like yourself, and that hand is actually what you pray for. So I used different images. The calligraphy was done by Yona Weinreb. I'll say that again. Here's what it looks like. They sent me a panorama, right, of the show in Portland, Oregon. So that one, I was going to go to Portland, Oregon for the opening, but I couldn't travel. My mom passed away that week. So that was where the show was. The piece was made large, and it was printed in Jerusalem. I went to Jerusalem to do the plates, and was there 6 months working in Kotzot Hayotzer, which is like an artist colony by the Jaffa Gate, and did silk screens, and they did huge, like 14 color, 18 color silk screens, and they're all about this size, the pieces. I was going to bring it in. But the one thing actually that I really like about this is if you look here, you can't really tell, But this one and this one in the front is a book. There's one other Holocaust Haggadah that was made, and it was made in a DP camp right after the war, and that's the one they showed. And then the one next to it is done by Leonard Baskin, who did a 5 Megillot. And I love that book so much, and I loved his work. So what happened is he was showing, David Kramer was giving a talk on Haggadahs from the collection, and they have this book in the collection. It's all over the world. It's been in it's in museums and collections all over. He was giving a talk, and my cousin Helen Wallach was sitting in the audience, and he showed this book, and he was like, "Oh, that's my Haggadah," and this is we. So he said, "Do you know the artist?" And he said, "That's my cousin." So she made the shit up, and I met with him and explained the Haggadah to him at the stacks at JTS, and then I said, I'm thinking of doing this 5 Megillot, and I need a teacher, and he starts writing down names of teachers who would be good in the city, and I said to him, David, Mr. Kramer, I stopped grappling with him. I said, I want to study with you. And he thought about it, and he said, it took a little while, and then he said, yeah, we'll do it. And so we did the 5 Megillot together, and then we've done many, many books since then. I brought a bunch of them to show, so that was the connection there.
Who was the person that did that other Haggadah, Laskin or?
Baskin.
Baskin.
Yeah, Leonard Baskin. Yeah.
Did you meet him?
I never did. He passed away. Actually, I worked with a printmaker who printed with him, and I thought maybe I'd meet him, but in the end, I never did. I also told you, I probably can't do this quick enough. I also did landscapes throughout this entire time. So this is a piece of mine that's actually in a show in Lenox now, and that's 60 feet tall, so that's 5 feet tall, and it's a canvas. And I've done a lot of pastels. So a lot of the pastels I spray. Let me see if I can show a good example. Here. I did a lot of work in Florida, because my folks live down in Florida, and that's at Loxahatchee Nature, and I did a lot of work in that one area. I would spray the pastels really a lot, and they would be like a thick kind of film that went on the pastels, and then I'd drag the pastels across it, and I'd get these kind of like interesting textures. To make them bigger, because when I had to work bigger or whatever, I started to put a acrylic ground on the paintings, and so there was like sand. It was like acrylic sand that I put on, and then the paint I would work with a paint spreader or a credit card, and I pull the paint across it, and it would work in the same way that a pastel would work. So a lot of the other pieces that I've done have you can see like there's the texture, but these are large paintings of this was from the Cherry Blossom Festival, which was around this time. I had a big show at the Brooklyn Museum. They have a big Cherry Blossom Festival, and I had like 15 painters. They choose a painter every year. So that was from that. Anyway, oh yeah. So this was a mural that I did for an office building in Dallas. And this is like 17 feet long. They asked me to do something. I listen to country music a lot. There was a song I was listening to called Bluebonnet Spring, but I didn't really know what Bluebonnet Spring was. And then so I went there, and Texas is very built over. It looks a lot like Route 17 or Route 4. I mean, it just looks like that, But if you go further down into Austin and you go into Hill Country, the Bluebonnets are down, and this was done in Hill Country. Actually, the photos and sketches were done in Hill Country, but the paintings were done here and then shipped down there. Oh yeah. So I did a lot of things that had a lot of color to them. I did a lot of work with aspen trees in New Mexico, because they were so yellow, and when the yellow leaves fall, the ground is yellow, and it just looked like, it was just amazing. And I did a lot of paintings of them. So, and I had shows of that, and sold a bunch of them, whatever. I just want you to just, in your mind, if you could just, this one thing I'd like you to do, if you could, just try to remember these aspen trees. Yeah, so there's a lot of, oh, here's another one. I did a lot of work down south. These are the sugar fields that down by my folks' house, that I used to go into the fields and see where the migrant workers are, and did drawings where they burn off the sugar. And that's that. Let's get back to Jewish stuff. Moving right along. Let's see. I also did these. These are pieces where I would set up friends, and I would do biblical stories. And these were like the beginnings of the books that I started to do. But this was the Haggadah, and a friend of mine was getting a divorce at the time, and so it seemed like the part of him was being divorced from the working part, or maybe he was getting married. He was getting married, and then it's his wedding ring. But he did get divorced after that. But yeah, he was getting married. Anyway, whatever. That's one. David Strauss. That's David Strauss. And this is a relationship that actually sort of fell apart, where I'm a little bit more familiar with this. This is when Ivy and I were breaking up, and this is Lot's wife. And the idea behind this one was Lot's wife wasn't supposed to turn around, and this is about a divorce and a separation and the burning of that beautiful suburban house. I grew up in Teaneck, so I know a little bit about suburban houses. But the burning of that house, where she turned around, and the idea is that her heart turned to salt. That she actually she looked too far back at the divorce, and that it really scarred her for the rest of her life. This is my interpretation of Lot's wife. It's okay, let's go. Yeah, so there were a lot of, I'm a martial artist. I was a martial artist for a long time, and I went to China to study in Beijing, and I also traveled to the south of China, where they have these beautiful mountains down there, and this is in the city of Guilin, and there's a beautiful river down in Guilin called the Li River, and I did a lot of, I used to hire a boat, and I'd be in the front of the boat with the canvas and go down the Li River and paint. So these are examples of maybe some of that work. But when I was down there, they have these Chinese scrolls, and people used to like unravel the thing, and they had pictures of the Li River, and I thought you can show movement and time in a scroll format. So when I saw those, I started to do those myself, and I started to do those scrolls doing parades, and I did a lot of drawings of the Mummers Parade. I'd go down to Philadelphia for that, and I did drawings of the Halloween parade in the village. So I did a lot of drawings of that. And then I started to realize that, after the parades, I started doing these things that I would go to like Purim celebrations, and I would sort of draw the Purim celebrations. So here's another one that's, that was down at Bialystoker Synagogue, and the Haman Sons, you can see that part. But these were drawings from that. I'm just going to maybe
Like 20.
have 20 minutes?
19.
Yeah, these are artists that oh yeah. So I was, like I said, I looked at other cultures, and there's one thing called the gentling of the bull. It's 10 drawings that show how you reach enlightenment, and it starts out with this idea of a person meeting a wild bull in the road, and then at the end he gentles the bull and he rides the bull, and then he lets the bull be, and there's enlightenment that happens. So it's a series of 10 drawings that Buddhists look at, and they kind of like have a path through a visual path to enlightenment. So I was always fascinated with that. So what I did was I contacted Yonah Weinrib, who is a rabbi and who has done a lot of books. And let's see. What I drew was this. These were the stories of Yonah. And they're done in the same sort of ink style that I had done and it starts off here, where it's like the word comes to Yonah, and it's like, save the people of Nineveh, and he realizes the people of Nineveh in 60 years, because he has visions are going to attack the Jewish people, so he tries to run away, and he gets the boat, and the boat is going to, Tarshish or something, right? And there's the boat, and there's a storm over his boat. So I did an entire series of drawings that could be shown in a room, that you'd start at one room, and you'd circle around, and it would end in the end of the room, and that would be the final thing where the voice of God says something like, really? Like, you're interested in a plant? I mean, I created all this stuff in the entire universe and you're crying over a plant? But it's sort of a similar kind of view of enlightenment. But in the Jonah story, it's kind of like it starts again because it's kind of like there isn't real understanding. I love the story. So I did that one. And that was the beginning of starting to do the Megillot. And the Megillot looks something like this. Here's one. It's, I had to choose how I was going to do each one of the images. Some of them are in full color, some of them are done in Hebrew, some of them are done in English. This one I did because it's about a convert. I started it in how Hebrew starts, but I did it in English. So it was like a person trying, and then it's all written out and painted. These stretch about, 30 feet, maybe 35, 40 feet. So it's the entire story. It's the whole Megillah. Anyway, so there's that one. Here's another example of one. This is the Megillah Eicha. And this is, I was sort of taken by the fact that every year we read Eicha about the boiling of babies and the destroying of princes and the destroying of the temple. And I was like, why do we do this? What is this process? And it has reasons, and I get it. But what I wanted to do was to show the constantly telling of the destruction. So what I did is I wrote the entire thing on black paper with white ink, and then I burnt the paper and attached it to a big scroll of this color, of a light color, and I glued that on, and then I added the English, the next writing here was done with black ink on white. So the idea behind it is you can tell the story, but you keep in mind the fact that it was burnt before. So that when you're reading it black, white, but you're seeing all the burnt edges. It's an interesting thing, and so at least I thought it was. It runs the whole story.
And that's your calligraphy.
That's my calligraphy. Yeah, I'm a calligrapher. Yeah. And when I was at RISD, they taught English calligraphy, and I said to the teacher, I want to do Hebrew too. My pleasure. Thanks for coming. Thanks. So I studied Hebrew calligraphy, and I teach it here too. Let's see, one more. Maybe I can show you. I love these shots. I'm sorry. This was a show at Temple Emmanuel, a show there. But in the background, this was a show of art. People have shown in their space for the last 20 years. And I got to meet Roman Vishniak when I was at RISD. And they had a dinner, and I got to go, because I was working in Jewish subject matters. I was Jew. One too many, whatever. So I went there, and I was too shy to talk to him. And Roman Vishniak did all these photos of Poland during the war, right before the war, and I loved his work, and I got so lucky. It's like reflected in my work. So that's right. So I just wanted to show that actually I have some sort of link. Anyway, that's that. Let's see if I can show you some. Here's another thing. I did the 5 books of David. That's David Kramer there. We laid him out because I really didn't quite know who King David was, so I wanted to do it. So I did. I think it's also maybe important to say that most of this work, except for a little bit, was done while I was teaching here. So and I work early in the morning, same as David Friedman. I work early in the morning. I work late at night. I don't work on Saturday. I work all Sunday. It's like we work. And I'll get up at 4 in the morning, like consistently and paint, and then you teach, But to me, it's part of the process to be an artist, and also then if you're going to be teaching artists, really. So this is an example of the 5 books of David. I made the 5 books of David.
What do you mean about the 5 books?
I just made it as sort of a bit of a pun. I mean, the story of David is so long, and it only goes to when his son starts to build the temple. So it doesn't even go past that. And again, usually we study for months, sometimes a year. The Megillot we studied a year before I started to draw. So, it takes a long time to learn this stuff and then to make your own interpretation of the stuff. So I'm constantly learning. But I just did 5, drawings. I brought one to show what it looks like. maybe I'll just show it maybe.
Is your goal to sell those or to just
You know, my
exhibit?
goal is to sell every single thing, to like collectors who will enjoy them and then give them to museums, and that's my goal. But in the meantime, I just make them. I sometimes I get lucky to sell a piece. Usually, actually, it was the landscapes that sold. The State Department bought a lot of them because they put them into embassies in other countries of American scenes, or collectors bought them. Those sold a lot.
But you have shown.
I have shown this. Yeah, I show these pretty regularly. And I think, this one. Remember I asked you to look at the birch trees, the aspen trees? I was always taken by this. When I went to, I'm sort of a big believer in this stuff. When I went to Auschwitz as a visitor, I went with a friend who's a dentist who was giving a talk in Krakow and who knew the chief rabbi in Poland. And he gave me a letter to be able to be in the camp of Auschwitz day and night for 3 days. So I had yeah. Yeah. And if anybody's gone to the Birkenau, it's silent. It's hard. It's just being there is incredibly difficult. And when I got to they had a special guide for us, and the letter from Michael Sudrick is a big deal. So I got a letter, and the guide came up to me and said, David Wanda, right? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, have you been here before? And I said, no, this is my first time. And she said, we've all seen your paintings of the trees. And she said, Birkenau means birchwoods. She said, and in the fall, it looks just like your paintings. So, I mean, there was something that was kind of like, okay, well, how did I know that? But I did have a dream before I went that Auschwitz was beautiful. I just had this dream that Auschwitz was a crazy dream. Auschwitz was beautiful. And I had a dream of these colored trees around the camp. And in fact, the whole area of Auschwitz actually was birch trees. And this is an area in the back. People usually don't go, but it's in the back where the lakes are, where they put the ashes, and the ashes form like a concrete. So they're the kind of like these lakes that don't go into the water so much, but into the ground so much. But this really was creepy. Yeah. Okay, you know what? So this is another painting that I had done. Right outside of the camp at Auschwitz, where they put the ashes into the river, the Solar River, and I made a little bit of reference to that here. But I'm always trying to find another way to explain the horror of what happened in ways that are unusual, and to make that like, no, it happened in a beautiful. I mean, I don't know. I'm always trying. Here's another one called.
So it's not necessarily your optimism.
Not at all. No, it's actually not at all. Exactly, that's a good question. No, it's really meant of another way that you can understand it even more, that if you look at something beautiful deep underneath, you know that you're not welcome. Deep underneath, you know you're a Jew, and a Jew is put on the side, and that there is no, when you can...
It's also like everything around when they were killed was going on like...
Exactly, like normal, but you're not part of it. You were put on the side, and I feel it strongly. So to paint the beauty of the nature right there, right, exactly, like what was going on where millions of people were being killed. Here, this is another crazy one. I'm walking in the back, where the red house is, where the first gas chamber was, way in the back. Maybe that wasn't where it was, but there is an area in the back. Like in the back behind Birkenau, if you keep going where all the ashes were, way back. I'm walking and I'm noticing this tree, and these trees were like these gorgeous trees. And they were like, the colors were amazing, and it could have been a little bit of my, like not even knowing what was going on then. But I realized that the fertilizer in the ground was what was going on.
The way you painted it looks like stained glass.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of just these leaves that flipped, and it was like, why would there be red and green and blue? In my mind, I'm sure I pushed it. In the studio, I'm sure I pushed it. But there was something very odd about it that made me just think, this place is hallowed ground, this place is unusual, this is where my, I can say where my people are buried. Anyway, so those happen there. I kind of think maybe it'd be a good idea to show some pieces. So I'll show like some examples. When I was in Birkenau, I make these sketchbooks, and I work in sketchbooks that I make because I don't know, the paper's usually not good in other books. So I make these books before I travel, and then I draw. What I did here was, I couldn't quite understand how it worked with the trains and why people didn't know what was going on. So I drew it. And what I did was, I start and I drew this, which is just a little train tie. I think I must have drawn it at like 5 in the morning or something like that, where the light is just barely coming up. And then that little train tie led to a train track. And then that little train track sort of led to a building. But there were lights on it, there weren't, and then that little building led to a more recognizable scene. And that was, and then that recognizable scene, you would go through that, and then there were these things that I drew that are these little markers that show which way the train should go. And I knew, you could see and I walked the train track as it was going, as I was drawing it, and I knew if the train had gone this way, this would be one way. If the train had gone this way, it would be another one. And you could see it. So what I had done is I saw that at another point there was a part where the train could have gone this way, this. In the morning early, I'm sure, or late at night when they came, they have that book night, I'm sure it was just a matter of lights and these kind of little places where soldiers would be. The confusion of it must have been incredible. I turned back around and looked when I got further on at what the scene looked like, the building I had just gone through. And this is where the guard towers are there. The building is that far back away. The train stopped at this part here. At this part here, the train would have stopped and the people would have gone. This would be probably more like the Hungarian, when they were just like killing people as soon as they came in. And then there's a guard tower where somebody, in my mind, somebody was standing there. When I showed it to the guy later, because I worked all night, there's a hotel in Aspen where I went and painted. They said, when they saw that, they said, yes, there was an SS man who famously said, yes, this is how it's done. When they figured out how to do this without anybody knowing what was going on, whatever this is. So they said that that's what that person represented. If that wasn't how you went, I did another series of drawings that you would walk down this other road, and this road would pass other guard towers. You could see the birch trees, but this is going towards. This passes the fields of ash and water in there, and it passes through these gates, and these gates lead to another building where people were stripped of their clothes and washed, and there's all examples. These are all the rooms that I had gone through that did that. When you went that whole process, this was the inside of a barrack, and there was that kind of. I drew this because it made it real for me. Because it was a way for me to say, okay, I'm an artist and I've lived, I'm alive now, and the way I can deal with this is drawing. So I actually also wanted to find out what the bathrooms look like. Because in my mind I was like, doesn't anybody think about that? So this is what they look like. There were these, marble or metal or stone things with holes drilled into them, and people were allowed in there for a short time, and then I thought, there's the moment where, when you were left to yourself again, you would be looking at a corner and going, where am I? That moment to me is that. And I sort of messed up and dripped things on the painting to show that, it wasn't such a kind of easy, pretty story. Let me see if I can show you some of this. Here's an example of a copy, a print I did of Song of Songs. I have a bunch of them that I wrote. I don't know, but. So again, this is a print, but these prints that are this long, they're a little bit, pricey, whatever. This is the writing, and I use the writing as to go over the artwork as sort of like a scrim, or like something to block out some of the story. But here I have this woman kind of making out with the wall. There's the wall, and the Tower of David being very phallic. On this one, in my work, we did Song of Songs here with the students, but the students were much more mature about the way they dealt with the story. When I did the story, I just went like about the relationships and the sex and all this kind of thing. I tried to show it in this because I hadn't seen anybody who ever did that. So I did that in my work, but didn't. And I showed, I think, yeah, these are different examples. I showed the tefillin straps turning into the letters, and the straps holding on to the arms, the pomegranates and the apples and all that and then at the end, the mountains are represented by the female figure, and then it goes back into a dream. So this is an example of, again, I never showed this to the students when they did their Song of Songs. They never saw it. They probably never will, hopefully. Maybe they'll see one, whatever.
This is all watercolor and
It's all like, what I do is
like-
I get printmaking paper that comes in rolls, and then I fold it up into whatever I want it to be, and then I make the book covers, and it's called an accordion fold book.
And
And it's watercolor. It's Arch's printmaking paper that I put. First I go in there with pencil, then usually I'll paint it over with acrylic to stiffen up the paper, then I'll go in there with more acrylic, then I go in there with ink, and then I start just working. Here's an example
David,
of...
just so you know, it's 11. Take your time. I'm just giving you a...
So I'll show a quick...
Take your time.
But here's one more, I'll just...
I'll give you a heads up.
This is a story that, it's a story about the spies. You know the story about the spies who didn't go into the... Who said we shouldn't go into the land. So I did a whole interpretation, a bit of a Holocaust take on the spies. And the idea behind that is I made Moses to be Herzl. And the 10 spies that said not to go in, I made them to be Kafka, the Sabtai Tzvi, Mahler, Freud, the Satmar Rebbe, what's his name? Thanks. The guy who was the head of the ghetto in, he worked with the Nazis, I forget his name. Marx, Woody Allen, and Bernie Madoff. So what I did was I made these personalities who were sure they don't think we can go into Israel. We'll be fine in the diaspora. There's lots of stuff to do out here. The two people I made to be Caleb and Joshua are, I made a young, what's his name? He was shot. He was a leader of the military in Israel, and
From the brother?
Yoni?
No, not the brother. No, he was a leader of Israel, and he was just shot. And I hate doing this.
Oh, Gandhi.
Rabbi?
Rabin, yeah. This is a young Rabin, and this is Mordechai Yanayevich, who is the head of the Warsaw Ghetto. And these are the two that I felt, the two heroes who said, no, we're not going to be pushed around. No, we're not going to. And these stand in front of the 10 spies who said, no, you can't go to Israel, you can't do this. So this is a representation of them. What I also start to deal with, remember, the spies then they say, oh, there's these giant figures that are in the land of Israel, and oh my gosh, they're so big. What I started to work with, because the Holocaust was so important to me, is I started to work with Nazi posters of what Aryan beauty is. And Jews are not of that. So what I started to do was to do these gorgeous, strong Aryan figures, and all of these little Jewish, they're running around, they can't even believe it, and they're hiding in, the rinds of pomegranates, and these are these strong figures. And remember, the spies say, oh, we'll never be able to go in there because they're giants. Here's a beautiful, this beautiful Aryan, image of an Aryan woman. These all come from Nazi posters. I did a lot of research to do that. Here's all the spies sitting in the pomegranate shell, and they're all like, and then here they are. And up here, I did this. My generation is like right after the Holocaust. So what had happened there is when they say they see us as grasshoppers, and in their eyes we're grasshoppers, what I meant is it sort of looked like these kind of anti-Semitic posters that turned a Jew into something else. And what this has is it turns this Jewish person into a grasshopper. So what I tried to show with the big nose and with the lips and the whole, that turns into this figure. In other words, how do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as strong? Do we see ourselves as people who can, or do we listen to other people and say, because in the story it goes, in their eyes we were this. But we don't know how in their eyes we were. But it's a self-hating kind of thing. So that's what I worked with this. Here I work, and then all of a sudden, there's, I guess that must be Moshe, yeah. He sees that the people are basically bowing down to the golden calf again of fear, and here they are. And then Anilyevich and Rabin are tearing their clothes because they're just so crazy that the people are believing this kind of grasshoppery thing that's going over. And then there's a midrash that even says that the words from the tongue of the spy's mouth was actually what killed all the people in the desert. The spies were there for 40 days. For 40 years, people had to go into the desert so that the entire generation died because of not being strong enough to face. So this is, and then after the people weren't strong enough, there's the Amalekites and the Canaanites who just decimated the Jewish people there. A couple were left to wander the desert for 40 years, and then to later get to the land. But this is my interpretation of the story of the spies. I have a lot of other things, but I think you guys really, thanks a lot. I just want to thank you for coming and listening. Thanks a lot.